Hello and welcome back to the Franchise Growth Podcast. My name is Belle, Director of Marketing here at AC Inc. And I am back with Angela on the podcast. Welcome, Ange.
Hi, I'm excited to get to be back hanging out with you, Belle. It's always fun.
Back on the podcast. We are going to be diving into so much good stuff on this episode. So I want to do our quick icebreaker and then dive right into the action steps and building blocks of actually building out an effective operations team in your franchise. It's going to be a great, very like action step oriented podcast. So very looking forward to that. So we'll do our icebreaker, which we
Okay.
like to start off our podcast with an icebreaker just to kind of get to know everyone on our team, our clients, people we have on the show. And they're always just kind of fun, simple little questions. So this one for
Easy for you to say.
well, I come up with them. I think they're
No,
simple.
you're pretty good. You're safe. I always get a little nervous, but okay. Hit
Okay.
me. Hit me.
This one today is, what is your favorite app right now? Could be,
Oh. Do you like my whole
do you want me to share mine?
okay, you share yours.
Mine is Pinterest. I have been newly
Oh.
to Pinterest on my phone. I'm usually like a Pinterest on my computer type person, but I have found that sometimes when I go to like Instagram or LinkedIn, even like social networking platforms, sometimes I find I just like mindlessly scroll. But with Pinterest, I always am like looking at cool images or neat quotes. Like I find it very visually stimulating. I
Hmm.
get cool website design ideas. And that's because those are the things I like on the the app. So that's what it's telling me, or that's what it's showing me. But I really like if I'm kind of feeling that like scrolling energy, like after lunch or something, like, okay, just gotta
Yeah.
scroll it out a little bit. I do find Pinterest is so much more fulfilling and so much more inspiring than some of the social media type apps.
Hmm.
So I've been really enjoying that lately, which is kind of new for me.
I guess because my first reason I hesitated so much is because I'm like, well, like the ones that I go to the most are sort of boring answers, like, LinkedIn or email or whatever. So I guess I've talked about this app before, but I have a new version because I was using an app called Gratefully for my gratitude journal, and it's just they get outdated and then you can't update them and then you can't access it anymore. So I have a new one. I don't even know what it's called. Oh my gosh. But it's called Morning exclamation mark. I just checked here. And you get to actually you can kind of create the questions it asks you. So I like that because you can, like, it had 3 questions about what I'm grateful for and then whatever. And I was like, I just want 2. So I could change it to 2 and then reword, like, what's one thing that you're gonna get done today. I put that in there because it would, getting clear on that in the morning, like one thing you're gonna get done today.
Oh,
um
that's a great.
yeah. Yeah. So it's, yeah, morning, morning, exclamation mark.
I love the name too, honestly.
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. So today we are going to be talking about building out your franchise operations teams. So in our last episode, you and I did together, we talked about some common mistakes that often, and just challenging mindsets that people can get into at that kind of growing or more emerging brand, like under 100 units. When you're wanting to bring in a more full-time or maybe a little bit more expert operations person onto your team to be doing that franchisee support, doing the franchise operations, aligning all the different departments. So it's a big question, and we get it a lot in like roundtables and client conversations. And I wanted to just share, and we could do hours and hours of podcast on this, but I wanted to share just some steps in terms of building out an operations team. So thinking of people to bring onto the team, what are you kind of looking for? What are some tangible things people can be doing? And I want to start off with the first one, which you always, we have touched about this a little bit in some past episodes last year. And one of the ones we always start with is getting super clear on what is currently missing in your brand.
Mhm.
So what is not working? So maybe let's start there and then kind of give a couple other tangible steps in terms of finding the right people. What are some things we can be doing as a brand to be bringing on an effective operations team?
Yeah, well, I guess so. Might sound obvious, but it's usually some symptoms that are showing up with franchisees,
Mm,
right? So the franchisees are past it, it's we're talking here like uh around 50 to 100 units, and like, yeah, right around in like the 75 unit range is a common one where
mm,
where we tried this, we had this person, we had our team set up this way, this didn't work, and then we did this. And if you say, well, how do you know it wasn't working? Like what was going on? Well, our franchisees are not engaging, or they're, and what I was going to say earlier, and I sort of jumped in on my own self, was that once the franchisee, like the first few years, usually a couple of years or so, the franchisees are it's easier to support them in the earlier stages because it's usually more operational support, and usually it's a little bit more streamlined in knowing like these are some things that usually work in the beginning with marketing and stuff. But it's
Yeah.
once they get sort of past that and they're like, I'm not growing,
Mm,
or they're not, or they're not growing, they're not engaging, or they're making over $1 million in revenue, but they're not making any money. There's no money in the bank account. So it's shows up, something's not right with it, really probably with the support, because the person that's the ops team overall, whether we're talking COO, VP, director, and then maybe front line, they're missing pieces, and maybe missing the framework, as we call it, right? They don't know how often, so then they start questioning everything.
yeah. So, first of all, before we dive into some of the more tangible action steps, I did want to mention if you are really struggling with this issue and really trying to figure out like who to bring on, what skill sets do we need, what type of training do we need, our field coaching framework, our guidebook that we use is something we actually bring into systems and set up for you and help you find the right people, help you figure out where those missing pieces are, help you set up that coaching structure, the programs and get buy-in. So we come in and help with that. But we also wanted to make sure this episode has some just tangible steps to get you started. So if you're not quite ready to jump into having us come in and just help do it all for you, we did want to give a couple basics to be thinking about in terms of bringing in the right people, the right things to be looking at when hiring for this specific area of your system. So just wanted to mention that in case someone's like, don't care, just want a solution. So one of the things though, so obviously the figuring out what's wrong, and you talked a lot about what those symptoms are going to look like. So what's kind of cluing you in that there's something missing. And then if we're trying to bring on someone to that ops team, the home office team in that operations support area, what are some really good things to be looking at? Like a couple things that you and I have talked about in the past include like vetting for your own company culture. So really thinking about how they're going to fit into your company specifically and your values and the things you care about and what your franchisees are like, right? Their personalities and all of that too. And then also a lot of like aligning expectations. So things like aligning, what is this operations person going to kind of be responsible for? What are we going to be providing in terms of support as the leadership team? So a lot of that is stuff we've talked about. So if you want to kind of expand on any of that or mention anything beyond those points too, would be awesome.
Yeah, and I probably sound like a bit of a broken record, especially if people listen to the episode that you mentioned earlier, that where we talked about the problems, but they really cross over a lot. So I think it's worth repeating that, when you're bringing somebody when you're building an operations team, um, really understanding, what the purpose of that side of the business is.
Mm.
And then really making sure that you vet for, like you said, culture, core values, but vetting for good leadership, the people side of things. I reflect so much on the family business, because like now the more we go along, and meet new brands and established brands, and I go, what were we doing different? And it really comes down to putting the franchisees first, but not in a way that, like, there's still boundaries, right? So anybody on that ops team needs to understand deeply, and that even includes like marketing people, as we, anybody really on the team, but especially the ops team needs to live and breathe and role model to the rest of everybody on the team that, if franchisees are happy and profitable, we're all good.
Yeah.
Vetting for understanding, the soft skills, and quick easy way to do that is even just go to ChatGPT. How can I vet for somebody to have good like understand situational leadership, or how can what questions could I ask to see if somebody's empathetic? Like those are just quick, like you said, making sure people leave with some quick things they can go do. Those are ways that you can vet people initially, and then looking at like what experience have they had in a leadership position, or with other people and relationships, and those kinds of things, and making sure those things are there.
I love that. And I think also on that is a big one is also just reading people's energy. And I know that maybe sounds a little woo woo, but as you just mentioned, so much of that role is working with people and really prioritizing the success of the people around you. And of course, that continues with compliance. It's not to say that, oh, they just want to go do this and that'll make them happy. No, of course, there's
Yeah.
boundaries and also understanding how to navigate those tough conversations and things like that. But a lot of that is also energy. Do you feel, excited to talk to somebody if there's a candidate who gives off just really calm, good conversational skills, like really engaging, all those things that you were just talking about? I think a lot of that is also something we kind of forget in that hiring that role. Ops, I feel, can sometimes sound very technical and very like, okay, get
Right.
her done, get her done. But in a franchise system, so much of that operations is very, very human oriented and very relationships oriented and communication oriented, not always just about spreadsheets or systems. And
Profit and loss statements and
okay, which
KPIs.
is also, of course, important. But I think sometimes that word operations, because in so many other types of businesses, it really does mean more of the practical steps and the SOPs and all of that kind of thing, which is where a lot of ops people kind of identify, at least in my experience in other industries. So I think that is a really, really good point about really focusing on that soft skills, the culture, the engaging energy, all of those awesome things that make someone a really good people person. And then, as you also said,
Mhm.
the educating on the relationship, right? So, what type of relationship is our operations department going to have with our franchisees, going to have with our home office team, our marketing
Yeah.
is
Yeah,
huge.
that just made me think I should clarify something about that when I say that. When I say, for anybody that's, newer to this, or doesn't maybe read my mind, when I say the franchisee franchisor relationship, what I'm really getting at is what is the franchisee responsible for and what is the franchisor responsible for? So when it comes to for example, the marketing side of things, like understanding, like the operations person, whoever, understanding that the franchisor, the brand fund and all that is about building the brand, keeping it innovative, knowing your differentiators clear, all of that. And then the responsibility for building the business lies on the franchisee, right? And when it comes to the franchisee in their local market, they're responsible for being compliant to the brand. We as a now I'm talking like I'm a franchisor, but we as a franchisor are responsible for, people love this line whenever I say it, protecting your investment. This always it leaves big takeaways when I say it, but telling a franchisee, I'm here to protect your investment. I'm not, when, as opposed to I'm here to hold you compliant. So understanding the roles and responsibilities of the franchisee versus the franchisor is so key in on the ops team. One other thing I thought we should touch on that is that we get asked so much is what is, and maybe I don't know if we've done this on other podcasts, but it probably bears repeating, is what is the ratio of, like, for a field team? I've got 75 franchisees. What should my department look like? Like, do I have a COO? What do I have? And so it always, every, depends on what experience or like expertise is already on the team. And so there's no straight line answer that we can give, because if you might have a marketing department that's quite active with the franchisees, and so maybe you don't need as much op support like on the marketing side. So I can't just give the perfect answer. But I know people are dying to know, like, what's the ratio, because there's all different ratios out there. So it also depends on if it's like a mobile service brand versus brick and mortar, or if it's brick and mortar retail clothing versus fast food restaurant, or any kind of restaurant for that matter, food, where you've got to really make sure that they're holding to the right health and safety standards. So there's a lot of variance, but in general, around 1 to 30 is kind of the average, or maybe on the lower end a little bit. So that's why on a side note, we're always trying to help franchise field coaches understand ways to be more productive. But I know that's a whole different topic. But if you've got 75 franchisees, you probably need to have at least two, field team members, and then whoever they report to. At the bare minimum, you'd have, that would be your operations team. That would be the, like, again, the bare minimum, but ideally maybe one more person in there. So you might have like a COO, a director of marketing, and then two field team members. And maybe your director of marketing also coaches a few of the franchisees.
Mm.
Sometimes that director of sorry, did I say marketing? Operations. You're like, oh, I'm gonna have to hope that she
I
corrects.
was going to correct you, but you were on such a good roll. I didn't even.
So director of operations, I meant to say that whole time, this last bit. That person will often have some franchisees that they take care of. And that could either be difficult franchisees or top performing franchisees because they sometimes they've been in the field and they've moved up now. And yeah, they sometimes take the more difficult. So that's just a few different kind of things to think about. Um,
Cool.
yeah, and then a question we get asked too is, do the um, franchisees, you know, just talk to the field coaches, or can they talk to those other people in the department? Like when you're building out that department, is the COO as part of their responsibility to talk to franchisees? Well, typically not on a regular basis, but it depends on your brand and whether you want to give them access. Most will usually, but ideally you want to set it up so that their field team member is the liaison for as much as possible, just because it's more streamlined.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And I think talking about the structure too, just something worth mentioning is that it's also going to depend on the type of coaching sessions that you want to have as a system as well. I know that for example, we do group coaching, performance group
Yep,
coaching, which allows us as a fractional coach to come in and do coaching for multiple franchisees at a time. So that also
exactly.
can be helpful if you are trying to come up with some strategies for being really efficient with your team structure and how you're going to be coaching and supporting those franchise owners as well. So just something worth considering. And Angela, I think going through what that structure can look like as just kind of basic bare minimum, if we know no details about your brand that can give us more customized answers, but just really bare bones. Just a general idea. I think that was really helpful, so people understand when they're bringing people on, what will that structure kind of look like. And again, if you have questions, you can always reach out to us about what your structure specifically could look like for your brand. Awesome. This has been so good. So many good, solid takeaways in terms of the vetting. I love the ChatGPT idea about different ways to vet for soft skills because I think that can be a tricky one in terms of what we want to be looking for. Shout out to my energy idea because I know sometimes that can be in hiring, honestly, something worth considering is just how you
Mhm.
feel in their presence as well and understanding your franchisees and how they're probably going to react to different personalities. Another tip would be if you are interested in having your potential candidates take the field coach assessment. We created an assessment with Zoracle Profiles, which goes through a bunch of behavioral characteristics, kind of the standard of what a successful field coach would be looking at in terms of behavioral characteristics versus someone who might need to fill some skill gaps. So that's a super cool tool as well if you want to use that for hiring. We do have a way to use it for that too. Yeah, so lots of awesome stuff in here. Is there anything else you want to add before we finish up today?
Well, do we have an episode already? I'm sure we do, on the framework. Like, what does that mean? What does the framework mean?
For sure. Yep.
Okay, because I'd say people might at this point be wondering that. And so maybe going and finding the episode on that, because that's something that's really goes hand in hand with, when you think about building an operations team, is like, well, what is your framework going to be for how often you coach franchisees, what happens in the coaching, all that stuff, which again, we talked earlier about, we have the strategic growth coaching framework that we provide. But if you have to know what you're going to be doing in order to build the team. So, or like as you build the team. So I just make sure people understood that piece too.
Yep. We even actually have a blog post which outlines it. So you can actually go and like reference different parts of it. So I can link that in our notes as well. If anyone's curious about, what we are talking about when we say coaching framework and implementing that in your system. Awesome.
That's it. That's all I'm going to say for now.
Love it.
Except for go be awesome, of course.
Of
But
course, of course. Well, thank you so much, Ange, for being on the episode today. That was so good. Always love catching up and chatting all things franchisee support. And for everyone listening, thank you so much for continuing to support the show. It really means so much. And we want to make sure we're providing as much value as possible. Please rate and subscribe and review if you can. And yeah, hope everyone has a wonderful week and go be awesome.